As humans, there are 6 types of natural instincts. One is fear. Fear is our emotional response to dangerous circumstances that we believe have the potential to cause death, injury, or illness. This harm is not just limited to physical damage. The threat to one's emotional and mental well-being can generate fear as well. For the person trying to survive, fear can have a positive function if it encourages him to be cautious in situations where recklessness could result in injury. Unfortunately, fear can also immobilize a person. It can cause him to become so frightened that he fails to perform activities essential for survival. Most of us will have some degree of fear when placed in an unfamiliar surroundings under adverse conditions. There is no shame in this. Each individual must train himself not to be overcome by his fears. Ideally, through realistic training, we can acquire knowledge and skills needed to increase our confidence and thereby manage our fears. Anxiety. Associated with fear is anxiety. Because it is natural for us to be afraid, it is also natural for us to experience anxiety. Anxiety can be an uneasy, apprehensive feeling we get when faced with dangerous situations, whether they be physical, mental, and emotional. When used in a healthy way, anxiety urges us to act or to end or at least master the dangers that threatens our existence. If we were never anxious, there would be little motivation to make changes in our lives. The person in a survival setting reduces his anxiety by performing those tasks that will ensure his coming through the ordeal alive. As he reduces his anxiety, the person is also bringing under control the source of that anxiety, his fears. In this form, anxiety is good. However, anxiety can also have a devastating impact. Anxiety can overwhelm a person to the point where he becomes easily confused and has difficulty thinking. Once this happens, it becomes more and more difficult for him to make good judgments and sound decisions. To survive, the individual must learn techniques to calm his anxieties and keep them in the range where they help, not hurt. Anger and frustration. Frustration arises when a person is continually thwarted in his attempts to reach a goal. The goal of survival is to stay alive until you reach help or until help can reach you. To achieve this goal, the person must complete some tasks with minimal resources. It is inevitable in trying to do these tasks that something will go wrong, that something will happen beyond the survivor's control, and that with one's life at stake, every mistake is magnified in terms of its importance. Thus, sooner or later, survivors will have to cope with frustration when a few or their plans run into trouble. One outgrowth of this frustration is anger. There are many events in a survival situation that can frustrate or anger a person. Getting lost, damaged or forgotten equipment, the weather, impossible terrain, enemy patrols, and physical limitations are just a few sources of frustration and anger. Frustration and anger encourages impulsive reactions, irritable behavior, poorly thought out decisions, and in some instances, an I quit attitude. People sometimes avoid doing something they can't master. If the person can harness and properly channel the emotion and intensity associated with anger and frustration, he can productively act as he answers the challenges of survival. If the person does not properly focus his angry feelings, he can waste much energy in activities that do little to further either his chances of survival or the chances of those around him. Depression. It would be a rare person indeed who would not get sad, at least momentarily, when faced with privations of survival. As this sadness deepens, we label the feeling of depression. Depression is closely linked with frustration and anger. The frustration person becomes more and more angry as he fails to reach his goals. If the anger does not help the person to succeed, then the frustration level goes even higher. A destructive cycle between anger and frustration continues until the person becomes worn down, physically, emotionally, and mentally. When a person reaches this point, he starts to give up and his focus shifts from "what can I do" to "there is nothing I can do." Depression is an expression of this hopeless, helpless feeling. There is nothing wrong with being sad, as you temporarily think about your loved ones and remember what life is like back in civilization or the world. Such as thoughts, in fact, can give you the desire to try harder and live one more day. On another hand, if you allow yourself to sink into a depressed state, then it can sap all the energy and, more importantly, your will to survive. It is imperative that each individual resists succumbing to depression. Loneliness and boredom. Humans are social animals. This means we, as human beings, enjoy the company of others. Very few people want to be alone all the time. As you are aware, there is a distinct change of isolation in a survival setting. This is not bad. Loneliness and boredom can bring to the surface qualities you thought only others had. The extent of your imagination and creativity may surprise you. When required to do so, you may discover some hidden talents and abilities. Most of all, you may tap into a severe or inner strength and fortitude you never knew you had. Conversely, loneliness and boredom can be another source of depression. As a person surviving alone or with others, you must find a way to keep your mind productively occupied. Additionally, you must develop a degree of self-sufficiency. You must have faith in your capability to go it alone. Guilt. The circumstances leading to your being in a survival setting are sometimes dramatic and tragic. It may be the result of an accident or military mission where there was a loss of life. Perhaps you were the only one or one of the few survivors. While naturally relieved to be alive, you simultaneously may be mourning the death of others who were less fortunate. It is not uncommon for survivors to feel guilty about being spared from death, while others were not. This feeling, when used in a positive way, has encouraged people to try harder to survive with the belief they were allowed to live for some reason or for some greater purpose in life. Sometimes survivors tried to stay alive so they could carry on work of those that were killed. Whatever the reason, you can give yourself to not let guilt feelings prevent you from living. The living who abandon their chance to survive accomplish nothing. Such as act would be the greatest tragedy.